Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we are going to discuss India-Israel relationship in the light of a document prepared by BDS movement. To talk about the document and related issues, we have with us Prabir. Hello Prabir, welcome to Newsclick. Before we talk about the document, it is pertinent to know the background in which this India-Israel relationship has developed. So, thinking about that particular background, as we all know that before 1990s, the relationship between India and Israel were not as, the nature of the India-Israel relationship was not as it is today. So what do you think, why this particular image was when it came to Israel among the Indian policymakers?
So let's be very clear. From 47 onwards, when India became independent, even before the national movement, Israel was regarded as a settler colonial state, as a transplant by European forces trying to put a European presence using the Jewish issue, particularly the massacre of the Jews, the gas chambers that Hitler had created in various parts of occupied Europe. So given that, the Jewish question was sought to be transformed, not as a European question, which it was, but to transfer the problem to Palestinian people and Palestinian lands and create a settler state. Now this was the understanding of the national movement, continued after that it was essentially the entire third world countries, as we say, the ones that came into independence. In fact, they got their independence from different colonial masters. All of them looked upon this as a colonial question, and especially a settler colonial question. This transformation slowly takes place in the 80s and of course after 1991, when India recognizes Israel, establishes formal relationships, and then tries to move closer to Israel over this period. Now both the Congress-led UPA as well as the NDA, both have developed relations with Israel, but I think in the case of UPA, it was still, well, it's a partner, we can buy things from it, we can share certain ideas with them, but it was not an ideological collaboration. But after India coming to power, the first Vajpayee government, the second Vajpayee government, and then later on the Modi government, you have a transformation of this relationship with the Zionism itself, which is not the right of the Jews to have state of their own, but really the right to have a Zionist state in which other nationalities, other identities would not be recognized as citizens. So effectively an exclusionary Zionist state which would be transplanted from European Jewry coming and settling in West Asia, Palestine lands. This transformation is not just a simple settler colonial issue with BJP now and earlier. It becomes also an alliance with Zionism itself. And this brings me back to the old issue that post-47, that BJP or its earlier progenitors, earlier forefathers, so to say, the RSS as well as the Jansangh used to say that we have to ally with Jews and Christians against communists and against Muslims. So that is the framing of the way they see it. And what we see now is a much more ideological cooperation, even though the fact is 9 million Indians work in essentially West Asia Muslim countries. Yeah. So even taking, and this is a huge part of a foreign exchange flow, even disregarding what would be India's national interest, we have really tied ourselves more and more with Israel on various counts. And as you said, it's visible in terms of military terms, in terms of warmth of the personal relationship between Netanyahu and Mr. Modi, and then you also have the internal politics where now Israel plays a big role both in terms of training our internal security forces, the police, border guards and so on, but also in terms of surveillance, the surveillance apparatus of the Indian state. We're starting from the telecom sector to looking at the borders, and in terms of also monitoring, perhaps using what are called black methods, hacking into various people's computers and cell phones. All of this, Israel seems to have become an internal partner as well. I think this is the transformation from an external relationship to becoming an ideological and military partner, and now become also an internal security partner in India itself. And I think this is a huge transformation.
That is a very significant point. In fact, India is the largest buyer of Israeli weapons. Can you elaborate on that particular issue?
Well, this has been the old thing. India originally used to buy weapons, a lot of it from erstwhile Soviet Union and the socialist bloc, because they supplied weapons cheaper. But they also manufactured a lot of the weapons with licenses which they got from others. Recently, we're tending to buy arms, and also, even if arms are produced here, they're sort of in semi-knockdown or knockdown condition, are really being assembled here. We have the Rafale agreement in place, we know, where actually almost fully developed aircraft are being sent here. And we don't see too much of a technology transfer there either. So that whole idea of technology transfer in defense has been increasingly given up. And India has turned out to be the biggest buyer. I think it buys more than 50% of Israel's production, certainly much more than what Israel itself buys for its arms production, what Israel's military forces buy from the arms manufacturers in Israel. So that's one thing. We are keeping a Zionist state, which is essentially, I would say, a state which has two classes of citizens. One who are full citizens, other citizens who are not full citizens. In fact, now with the latest changes that was made in the Israeli Citizenship Act, who can ask for self-determination and who can't, it's also clear that the question of a two-state solution is over, and Israel now recognizes Jewish citizens of Jewish descent as really full-fledged citizens. Others are under various kinds of curbs, under various kinds of limitation. That is of those who were in the Israel original territory, of which was pre-1968. Those who are the occupied territories, which are also being slowly incorporated into Israel, they have even less rights. They don't even have the right to free movement. So taking all of that in consideration, you see an emergence of a really apartheid state in the full sense of the term. And this, in the 21st century, that it should happen itself shows the complicity of the West and the United Nations in different ways in this process. But Indian government has not only developed relations politically with Israel more and more, but also by procuring arms from them in such large amounts, arms which we could also conceivably make ourselves, have also therefore provided implicit subsidy to this apartheid state.
So our taxpayers' money is basically helping the occupation in the West Asia.
In some sense, yes, and let's not forget our taxpayers' money is also helping corruption in Indian arms purchases, because even the Israeli courts are now hearing cases about arms deals where corruption is taking place, and some of those arms deals are Indian arms deals.
Going through the document which is prepared by BDS, I found certain interesting elements related to the larger security and surveillance related technology transfer from Israel. In that particular context, the report says that Indian police is trained by Israeli police forces, and we are also buying certain spy softwares. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think the depth of the penetration of the Israeli industries and the security forces into this is being underestimated. Yes, I've looked at the report. I think it's an excellent report. But let me tell you three areas that we need to think about. One is the police training. And when they train in Israel, they're also trained about how you should look at demonstration, how you should look at people. And that training seems to be something which is now being adopted earlier in Kashmir and now even in UP, where the whole question of punitive punishment in terms of fines, this is something Israel has done. No other country has done it. The first time we are hearing about citizens, punitive damages on citizens in case of violence breaking out. Now, who has propagated the violence? No proof. But people are being saddled with claims of compensation which has to be given to the state. Now, this is something as a model really comes out of Israel. I don't think I've ever heard of this being used in India before this. This is Uttar Pradesh. Now, if we take also the other models that they have used, you can see this whole idea of Kashmir, this internet being cut off, telecom being cut off. All of this seems to have come, this as ideas seems to have come from the practice in what would be the occupied West Bank. So you can see a lot of that being imported. So that is one part of the issue. The second part of the issue is what you call the training, etc. I'm lumping it here. The second part of the issue is the fact that your telecommunication network today has a built-in surveillance system, and there are a number of agencies of the government, I'm not listing them here, who are allowed to surveil people's communication by the authority of supposedly the Home Secretary, but we know that the number of such orders that he has signed, it's humanly impossible for him to have read all of this. So this is what is called bulk signature. 1,500 people, names are put up, you give one signature and all of them can come under surveillance. And then what happens is there is a telecommunication system in place by which you can listen to all the communication, you can pull the information out, you can store it on basically storage, which can be accessed later. Now, it is also true that in the US, we saw this is bulk surveillance, exactly in the pattern what NSA does internally in the US, that you only say that you have seen people's information after you already have found something by automatic means. So all this storage, the surveillance system, the processing of it, using IT tools of different kinds to process it, all of it, even in the United States, there is a suppliers of a lot of the systems are Israeli systems which have come out of the Israeli military. So those are also the systems which seem to be in place in India. So India seems to have procured a large part of this kind of telecom infrastructure, which is really listening to the communications that is taking place internally. And if you have Israelis providing that infrastructure, it's also true they have the ability to themselves listen into it, because after all, the supplier has backdoors into this equipment, allegedly for the purpose of maintenance. So they automatically can look into what is happening. If they want, they can also skew this information so that you get to hear what they think you should hear. The last point is what you talked about, what I will say, going beyond normal legal, within quotes legal, because we know the law is being controverted, the spirit of the law is being violated, then you actually have actual illegal operations done by the state, which was the Pegasus software, which allowed intrusion into people's cell phones through various means. Some of it has been uncovered. That means you make a WhatsApp message comes, you click onto it, automatically Pegasus software is installed on your phone, and it actually it infects your phone to such a degree that even a factory reset will not get rid of that virus, and I'm calling it virus because it really acts as one. And then they can tap into all your communication. And this, it seems, the government has repeatedly stonewalled it, but they have never said no, that these intrusions were made by a government department under rules which the Home Ministry has set up, because all the time Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad has said that these Indian agencies have followed the law. Now, yes, under law, they have hacked into my phone. It's not a nice thing to hear, okay? But as it has now become public, Pegasus software did infect a certain number of people. I think it's an extremely important issue, because I don't think that this kind of black operations are permitted under Indian law, whatever Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad's interpretation might be. I don't think they're really permitted. And if they were, why has the government not been forthcoming and say, yes, we've done it, because we are protected by law? Why then stonewall all of this and saying whatever we have done is legal, but not saying, yes, we have done it and it is legal? So I think this is the other issue, that black operations carried on by Indian government with Israeli support. Pegasus, as you know, is an Israeli software. And that against your own citizens, I think it raises huge issues on every sense. And Israel, unfortunately, has become, therefore, a partner against the Indian people. That's only one part of it. But the kind of closeness we see endangers India's international standing, particularly in West Asia, where there will be huge economic and political stake, because all said and done, Israel still is 6 billion people. And the rest of the population there, from stretching from Iran to North Africa, regard Israel as a country which is an outlaw state, as a rogue state.
Yeah.
And therefore, making that our closest friend, 6 billion people, is politically, in the long term, a policy which does not sit well with either India's past or its future.
True. The Pegasus incident, for example, last October, many of the activists related to Bhima Koregaon case came forward and said that their phone was hacked. And the police, Maharashtra police, was found complicit. Not exactly, but they denied, but it was very much visible.
I think it was the government of India, central government issue.
True.
It wasn't done by the Maharashtra police.
So in that particular context, if we come to our last question, which is bring us to the point that we have seen the kind of legal and policy initiative Indian government in last 6 years, particularly last 1 year, 6 months, has taken. The abrogation of Article 370, the bringing of the CAA kind of act, which basically excludes certain section of the population, certain section of some religions from Indian citizenship, acquiring Indian citizenship, and so on and so forth. You were also answering a question mentioning how Israel has undertaken, has basically initiated similar policies vis-a-vis Palestinians. If we see this kind of development in the larger context, what do you think? If our ideological affinities are so close to Israel, where will our nation
well, let's parse this hour. Our is the government of India or the party in power. True. It is, I don't think, it's the Indian people. So I would reject that it is our ideology. It's really a foreign ideology which came with European racism and white nationalism of different varieties, which was something which was owned up by the RSS, and that became the Hindu nationalism or Hindu supremacy ideology, if you will. So that's where it really comes from. I reject it as being ours. And I think the Indian people have shown in the last few weeks that they also do not regard it as ours. The first time, I think after 47, we have had such a large, diverse protest breaking up all over the country against this concept of targeting one community in the name of citizenship. I think there are two issues here which we must bring in, and of course, ideologically, they may have some affinities to Israel. But let's face it, Israel is only 6 billion. It's a small country. Let's not overestimate their importance in the state of things here. This is homegrown, ideological, exclusionary politics. That means it wants to exclude a certain set of sections from Indian nation. And it wants to create what was called the Hindu Rashtra, the Hindu nation, which as I would define it as Hindu supremacy. As two of their leading thinkers, Golwalkar and Savarkar, talked that yes, Muslims can stay in India, but as second-class citizens. That was the basic thrust that was there, because it's also very clear Muslims, Indian Muslims are in very large numbers.
True.
Then nobody is going to take them, or they're not going to go anywhere. So essentially the idea is to disenfranchise them. The second part of it, I think, is very clear that this may get a certain kind of support from Israel itself, but the original model of this really came from what I call European nationalism within quotes, but essentially a blood and race version of the nation, which excluded people and had an internal enemy. Nationalism was based on an external enemy and an internal enemy, and this is the kind of nationalism which the RSS loved, and that's what it propounded. And this is what we see now today. External enemy is Pakistan, internal enemy is Muslims. So that becomes then a potent basis for keeping a nation, a nationhood tied to a partial understanding of the nation, and therefore, as I said, essentially a carbon copy of white supremacy, Hitler's Nazi Germany, if you will, and ideologically, not physically, ideologically that's where it is going. And then, of course, an Indian exclusionary nation which will exclude certain sections from its citizenship. I don't think we should give too much credit to Israel here. I think this is much more our indigenous variety of homegrown, quote-unquote, nationalists that we have to fight.
Yeah, I agree on that point. With that, I thank you very much for being here. The document has been prepared in collaboration between Newsclick, People's Dispatch and BDS India. The document will be soon published on the Newsclick. You can go to the Newsclick website and read it. Thank you.